What's going on, guys? Draken1221 again, and welcome back to the channel. Today we have a special video for you guys. It's going to be a subscriber request or multiple subscriber requested video. So today we're going to be taking a look at a kind of a virtual deck profile on my take on Edgar Markov. But before we get into that, again, I always like to appreciate the feedback, the comments, the views, the subscribers that have kind of accumulated along the way. Thank you guys very much. I do appreciate that, and it kind of keeps me making videos, whether they're once a month or twice a month. I do want to pick up the volume of content, but we'll get into that in another video. As you can see, I tried a different format for today, so I opted to include the webcam to give you guys a different, more in-depth and personable experience as we kind of go through things. You kind of see me explain things live in action. Let me know what you guys think. If you guys like that, if you guys dislike that, we kind of go from there. The second thing is, in my Yuriko deck, I alluded to a potential partnership. So I have a TCG player affiliate link currently. So what this does is if you save the link and bookmark it and you use this for any of your TCG player orders, whether it's Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon, sealed product, deck boxes, things like that, I do get a small kickback on that. And this is more of a hobby for me. It's not really a day job, so to speak. So with things like that, I do appreciate it. And it all goes back into the channel, right? This is something I do for fun. So 100% of those profits and those kickbacks go right back into the channel. I've already used some of that. I had some friends use my link, so I already used some of that to filter into things like new lighting. So when I do these in-person deck profiles, I will have kind of better and more professional lighting. It's something that always bothered me. But kind of into the main event for the evening, it is going to be my take on Edgar Markov. So a couple things. This was a deck that was in demand. I think at least, I have 80 subscribers, and when 5 people request a deck profile, it's a pretty high number in my respects. So I don't have the cards for this deck. It was a deck that I always kind of looked at and wanted to build. I just never did. So this is all virtual. So take it with a grain of salt as far as some of the card choices. A lot of this stuff does involve some testing. So, maybe if you put this together or have an Edgar Markov deck in person, you can kind of piece this together and let me know what you think. So this is something that the theory and some of the restrictions and rules I put on this deck was this would be the exact deck that I would purchase straight up if I were to purchase and buy into Edgar Markov today. I would buy these exact 100 cards, and we'll go over a couple honorable mentions as well. And the second thing is I didn't really have a budget. I did want to keep it in the realm of $1,000. I think for a 3-color deck. And rule number 3 was we're going for as high power as possible without going for EDH. So that's kind of my thought process with this deck. We didn't really have any restrictions on the actual card choices aside from just let's keep it under $1,000. So doing my research and looking at other deck profiles and videos and stuff like that, the one drop engine, so to speak, was the strongest and most powerful version that I saw. So we're going to go with that. So as you can see here, kind of going into things, Edgar Markov, 5-mana vampire in Mardu colors. Eminence, whenever you cast a vampire spell, make a 1/1 vampire. It's got first strike and haste. And whenever this card attacks, you put a 1/1 counter on each vampire you control. So you can see how that would get out of control. It's kind of like an emblem. Eminence is crazy. If you watch my channel, I love the Ur Dragon. So having like an emblem in the command zone that just kind of static ability funnels into your strategy is always super strong, and we really abuse it with this deck. So the main portion of the deck is going to be kind of like that 1-drop cantrip-y tribal, and then we kind of branch off into like a Lord theme, as well as 1 or 2 other minor things. So kind of going into things here, we opted for about 12 1-drops. I see decks run 10. I've seen decks run 14, 15, literally just filling their deck with any 1-drop card that classifies as a vampire. I decided, a deck without testing, I think 12 is the sweet spot. You always kind of see one. The 1-drop vampires could be just any 1-drops of your choosing. I opted for the suite you see above for a couple reasons. I'm not going to go over all of them just because most of them are in there because they're vampires, but Viscera Seer, obviously a mainstay of the format, allows you to get some aristocrat strategy going. Vampire Cutthroat, a little 1/1 skulk with lifelink. This guy has Death Touch and Lifelink. Knight of the Ebon Legion, I believe this was a standard powerhouse. I could be mixing it up with a different card. You have Pulse Tracker and Vicious Conquistador, which when they attack, each opponent loses a life. Indulgent Aristocrat, I think this is one of the better ones. Sack a creature, put a 1/1 counter on all your vampires. So not to get too in depth, but we opted for 12 1/1s. You know, I could easily see us pushing this to 13, 14, 1 drops. But so essentially, what you have to do with all these 1 drops is tag on the text, make a 1/1 with it. So these cards become much more powerful, and they allow us to kind of go wide really quick. Into the 2-drop creatures of the deck, you have Blood Artist, which is, again, a mainstay in the Aristocrat strategy. Cordial Vampire, slam dunk card. I can't believe this card exists. 2 mana, whenever Cordial Vampire or another creature dies, you put a 1/1 counter on each vampire on your team. This card is nutty, low on the curve for 2 mana. We want to see this card every game. Without like in-person or virtual playtesting, this card, from what I've seen, is nuts. Cruel Celebrant, feed into the Aristocrat strategy. Obviously, we're not really on a budget. We're in red, so we're going to play Dockside Extortionist. Dusk Legion Zealot, I opted for this because you are throwing a lot of cards on the board really quick, and being able to replenish your hand is one of those things we'll get into as one of the sub-themes of the deck. So when it enters the board, you draw a card and lose a life. So essentially 2 mana, draw a card, lose a life, make a 1/1 with it. Legion Lieutenant, again, we are going for the go wide Lord strategy. So this is just a 2 mana Lord. It's going to give all our vampires +1/+1. Tithe Drinker, another kind of all-star sleeper of the deck. 2 mana, lifelink 2/1, but it extorts. So now all of your vampires you're playing essentially are cast, make a 1/1, drain the table, and gain 3 life. So that card gets pretty nuts as well. Vampire Socialite, I like this card. It's one of the newer cards. It has Menace, but whenever this card enters the battlefield, if an opponent lost life this turn, you put a 1/1 counter on each other vampire you control. So again, you're kind of putting 1/1 counters and lording your board up. And as long as an opponent lost life this turn, each other vampire enters with an additional 1/1. So you dealt damage, and then each additional vampire you play gets an additional 1/1 counter. Again, it helps you with your go wide strategy. Callous Blood Mage, along the lines of the Dusk Legion Zealot we were talking about before. So 3 mana, when it comes to the battlefield, you choose one, you make a 1/1 pest, you draw a card, lose a life, or you exile target player's graveyard. Having the utility on a card like that, that's a vampire, and then you staple on the fact this makes a 1/1 with it. Kind of can't pass it up. Captivating Vampire, because we're going for power, there's not a ton of flavor in this deck, so we kind of pick it up where we can, but it's a 3 mana Lord. They all get +1/+1, and tap 5 untapped vampires you control. You gain control of a creature and it becomes a vampire, so it's also going to get that +1. Super flavorful, also very good. I think Cordial Vampire is a little bit better, but this card is insane. Drana, this is like the first card I think I put in the deck when I read it. I was like, wow, this seems pretty good. 3 mana Vampire, so it's going to cantrip into a 1/1 when it comes to the board. Flying, first strike, and whenever this card deals combat damage to a player, you put a 1/1 counter on all your attacking creatures. Again, continuing the Lord's theme. You can see how, as you play your vampires, and then as they slowly beef up into 2/2s and 3/3s and 4/4s and 5/5s, this deck closes out games very, very quick. Florian. So one of the things that I believe to be true with tribal decks in particular, especially with something like the Ur-Dragon or Edgar Markov, slivers, things of that nature, things like card draw, things like single target removal, ramp, board wipes, the key pillars of building a deck, getting those on your creatures amplifies that creature's utility tenfold. So having card draw, like in the form of Florian, on a creature makes this card much more powerful than it seems kind of at the surface. So first strike, at the beginning of your post-combat mana phase, exile the top X cards of your library, where X is the total amount of life lost, and then you can play one of those cards. So it is card draw, it is a vampire, it cantrips, makes a 1/1, and kind of keeps the theme going. Forerunner of the Legion, so 3 mana tutor essentially, and then when another vampire enters the battlefield under your control, target creature gets +1/+1 until the end of the turn. So it's going to be some creatures, but more importantly, it is a tutor for any vampire. I did want to play a suite of tutors in this deck, and obviously if I was, investing in this, I would include those tutors, but you kind of don't know what is the best cards in the deck versus what are some of the sleeper cards in the deck, which are some cards that maybe you think will overperform and actually underperform. So I would include tutors with this deck post playtesting, but this one you kind of can't go wrong with. Stromkirk Captain gives your vampires first strike, and it is a 1/1 Lord. Welcoming Vampire. This card is really good on the surface in this deck. So again, card draw on a vampire. But the cool thing is when a creature enters the battlefield, power 2 or less, you draw a card. So you got to think of it this way. You have Edgar in the, on the border in the command zone. You play this. You make a 1/1. You draw a card. Just too much utility to kind of keep that going on a creature. Yahenni, a 3 mana slot, haste. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, it gets a 1/1. And then you can sacrifice another creature. This card gains indestructible. So you can see how Yahenni, with kind of our aristocrat things going on, can get big really quick. One of my favorite, if not my favorite creature in the deck. Just, I mean, the artwork's really nice. It gets really big and it's really stupid. But it can also save itself too, so it's got built-in protection. Bloodline Keeper, textbook vampire support, 4 mana, flyer, tap to put a 2/2 vampire. And when you have 5 or more vampires, you pay a black and you transform it. When you transform this guy, it turns into the Lord of Lineage, which is a flyer. Taps to also make 2/2 black vampires. And then all your other vampires get +2/+2. So it's a Lord times 2. So it's +2/+2 to the whole board. So now your 1/1s are 3/3s. And, you know, you kind of see how that can get out of control. Very low opportunity cost as well. You're talking 4 mana to cast. And, you know, as you surpass 3 mana on the mana curve for creatures, you want them to have some sort of utility and feed into your strategy. Edgar Charm Groom, one of the cards I kind of overlooked when I first built the deck, but kind of as you read it, the more you read it, the more you're like, wow, this card is pretty good. 4 mana, other vampires get +1/+1, so it's a Lord. And then when it dies, if they deal with it, if it gets swept in a board wipe, whatever, you transform it, and it transforms into Edgar's Coffin. So at the beginning of your upkeep, create a 1/1 vampire token, and then when this card has 3 or more counters on it, you transform it. So essentially, you're just like, Lord, it dies, make a 1/1, then make a 1/1, then make a 1/1 on your next upkeep, and then boom, transform it, Lord them, and then repeat the process. So you can see how that card can kind of feed into the strategy. Elenda the Dusk Rose, I opted for this just because of, you know, one of the things that can happen is you just play your hand out on the board and you don't want to be left with nothing to follow up with or get swept up in a board wipe or something like that. So this kind of gives you board wipe insurance. So for 4 mana, it's a 1/1 lifelinker. Whenever another creature dies, you put a 1/1 counter on Elenda. And then when Elenda dies, you make X 1/1 vampires with lifelink, where X is her power. So if Elenda was a 10/10, and Wrath of God hits the board, you're just going to make 10 1/1 vampires and kind of recover very easy. Sanctum Seeker, this is a card that reads really well, but again, is more of a card that you would want to test out before you kind of, you know, make the final cuts, so to speak. But it's a 4 mana, 3/4. Whenever a vampire you control attacks, each opponent loses a life, you gain a life. So this allows you to make some really big life point swings, and kind of really weaponize the 1/1s, whether they die or not. So again, on paper, Sanctum Seeker things like would be pretty good, but it's a card that would need testing. Bloodline Necromancer, we're creeping into the 5 mana slot here. A lifelinker, when it enters the battlefield, you reanimate a vampire. Very simple. Again, you don't want to use something like this to reanimate your 1/1s. That's why we don't have a heavy reanimator strategy. But to cast this to reanimate like Champion of the Dusk, Florian, Drana, Captivating Vampire, any of your lords is a power play. Champion of the Dusk. So again, we're doing the 1/1 cantrip strategy. You know, we want to not run out of gas or get swept up in a board wipe and have no follow-up play. So what Champion of the Dusk does is you put it on the board for 5 and you draw cards equal to the number of vampires you control and lose X life. So if you have 10 vampires, we'll go with the arbitrary number of 10 or 5. You draw that many cards and lose that much life. So again, if I've played 4 vampires and I have 4 vampire tokens and then I slam this, I'm going to draw, 9 cards. So you can see how Champion of the Dusk helps us refuel our strategy. Malakir Blood Witch, this is just a 5 mana. It's really in there just for the power play. You are paying a lot of life because you are heavy black, and you are using it to draw cards. So you want to be able to recoup that and stay in the game. So flying pro white, and when this card enters the battlefield, each opponent loses life equal to the number of vampires, and you gain life equal to the life lost this way. So if you have 5 vampires on the board, you're losing 5 for each opponent, and you're going to gain 15. So you're creating a really huge life swing that you could kind of control the game with. Crossway Troublemakers, Again, having something like card draw on a vampire, super important. Attacking vampires have death touch and lifelink, so you can put those 1/1s to use and get some utility. And whenever another vampire you control dies, you pay 2 life. If you do, draw a card. So board wipe insurance. If I have 10 vampires on the board and I slam this and you board wipe me, I'm going to recoup, at least some of that damage done by my opponent. So awesome card. I really like Crossway Troublemakers. 33 cents. Blows my mind. That card seems like it should be at least a couple bucks. Anyway, Patron of the Vein, another one of my favorites. You can see how the top end of our vampires are super strong and super powerful. That's because they have to be, right? We can't waste, 5, 6, 7 mana on something that's not really playable. So this is a flyer. When it comes to the battlefield, you destroy a creature your opponent controls. So again, bumps it up to the top of utility because it is creature removal, which is one of our core pillars of deck building, as well as being a vampire. And then whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you put a 1/1 counter on all your vampires. So again, this guy comes to the board, nukes a creature, makes a 1/1, buffs the entire board, and then continues to exile things. You don't get much better than that in terms of synergy with minimal effort. So I really, really like Patron of the Vein. And then, so that is the vampires. We have 37 vampire count. You could easily go up. I don't know if I would cut vampires just because I think 37, I would say probably 35 to 30, maybe 39, 40 is probably the sweet spot. 40 on the really high end. But again, you can't go wrong with just playing more vampires. Sorceries. So obviously we're playing Vandal Blast. This is one of my favorite cards. It's in here for the Overload. Destroy all artifacts. Agadeem's Awakening. If you know me, you know that I love MDFCs and I really love the Kamigawa lands. They're basically the same thing. So Agadeem's Awakening is basically an untapped swamp on one side, and then on Agadeem's Awakening side, it's triple black and X. Essentially, you reanimate X or any amount of targets with different mana costs from your graveyard. So let's say you pour 6 total mana in this card. You get a 0 mana value card, a 1 mana value card, a 2, and a 3 mana value card. And it's a land on the other side. So you have to play it. Slam dunk card. I really like these. Pact of the Serpent and Minions Murmurs. Effectively the same card. This is going to draw for the amount of vampires you control and you lose that life. This is just going to draw for your overall creatures. So if you had a floating dockside, you might draw an extra card. But again, it is in the same vein as Champion of the Dusk, right? I've played out my hand. I have 1 card in hand. I have 10 vampires. I just so happen to have Pact of the Serpent. Boom, draw 10 cards. Again, it's going to keep our strategy flowing. And with that kind of engine, we're able to close out games turn 5, 6, 7 at a high power table, sometimes even sooner. So one of my things when I build decks, especially creature tribal decks and things like that, is I like to have between 2 to 3, 4 board wipes is kind of pushing it in a creature-based deck, but you want as many of those to be one-sided as possible, especially when it involves your creatures. So, for example, my Dragon deck, I push things like Crux of Fate. I was playing Toxic Deluge, because those things I can control what dies. I don't have to wipe out what I don't want to. So, Olivia's Wrath is the Crux of Fate of vampires. 5 mana. Each non-vampire creature gets -X/-X, where X is the number of vampires I control. So you're going to nuke the entire board. Gets around indestructible. It's better in this deck, I think, than Toxic Deluge. And by better, I don't mean a better card. I just mean it kind of synergizes with things. I would rather pay the extra mana or two to protect the rest of my board, because Deluge, right, you're playing a bunch of 1/1 vampires, and if you don't have enough lords established on the board, you're going to sweep up all your own creatures in your own Toxic Deluge. So that's why I'm playing Olivia's Wrath, opted to cut Deluge. Vandal Blast being the other board wipe, and then the third board wipe we can get into a little bit later. Instance, obviously, Swords to Plowshare is one of the best removal spells, if not the best removal spell in the game. So you got to play it. Plumb the Forbidden, I think this card's insane. So 2 mana, draw a card and lose a life, but you can sacrifice a creature or any number of creatures to copy it. So if I have 10 vampires, what I can do is I can sacrifice 5 of them and draw an additional 5 cards and lose an extra 5 life. But it's only 2 mana and it is an instant. So if I have, we'll go with the number of 10 vampires again, and I get hit with a Wrath of God, I can say, all right, on the stack and response, Plumb the Forbidden, sack 10 vampires, draw 11 cards. And then you've replenished your hand, and that board wipe essentially is null and void to you. Anguish Unmaking, and we'll go hop over to Generous Gift. 3 mana, kind of destroy any permanent. I like to include, 2 of those in my decks. Anguish Unmaking, kind of exiling, which is good. It can hit things like Perforos, Thassa, and then Generous Gift is going to be able to destroy permanents, leave the 3/3, but that's irrelevant. And this hits lands. One of my play groups plays very high power, a lot of artifacts, a lot of Brea stuff, but we see things like Sarah's Sanctum, we see things like Gaia's Cradle, so being able to hit those lands, Cobble Coffers, I want to be able to snipe those out. I don't want to let them free reign and just go every turn, let's tap Cobble Coffers for 40 mana. We're not going to allow that. So one of the things I wanted to have that as I built the deck, I don't know if I need as much protection just because I built the deck to kind of refuel itself, but it is always good to have cards to protect your board. So Teferi's Protection, I would probably play that no matter what just because it is Teferi's Protection. But Flawless Maneuver is a flex slot. This is a card I would want to test. I was playing all the free commander spells, but I ended up cutting them just because you're not playing Edgar Markov on the board very much unless you're trying to end a game. But free, give all your creatures indestructible. I thought this would be really powerful. I thought it would slot in nicely. My only gripe is not the actual card. It's just the way I built the deck. Do I need this as a protection spell or can I slot in something else? So this is a card that would need testing. Wear and Tear. This is one of my favorite Boros removal spells. Split card, 1 white, kill an enchantment, 1 white, 1 red, kill an artifact, and then you can, fuse it together. I feel like that utility is very good. Then we have, I go back on Swords to Plowshares. Deadly Relic is the best removal spell, I believe. I think Deadly Relic is better than Swords to Plowshares. But I digress. You can debate in the comments. But kind of underneath those come Lethal Scheme and Snuff Out. So I want to talk about these because these are some of my favorite removal spells in the game underneath Deadly Relic and Swords. So Snuff Out is basically 4 mana, but you can pay 4 life and cast it for free if you control a swamp, and you destroy a non-black creature. So yes, it can't be black, which comes up sometimes, but it's a free kill spell, which matters a lot. One of the things and one of my rules of thumb in Commander as of the last 2 years since the Commander cycle of free spells came out in 2020 is if it's free, it's playable. Even the Fog, Obscuring Haze, that card's totally playable. It's free. So that's why I included Snuff Out. And then Lethal Scheme, brand new card. So 4 mana, Convoke, destroy a target creature or planeswalker, and each creature that Convoke connives. So conniving, if you don't know, is from the new set. Essentially, you get to loot, draw, discard, and then if it's a creature or non-land, you put 1/1 counters on stuff. So not only am I buffing my board, I'm drawing cards, but more importantly, I'm tapping those little 1/1 vampires, and it's a free kill spell. So again, free cards are good. Fun fact for you on kind of this card, I slotted into my Yuriko deck. Hands down, one of the best removal spells in that deck. Second thing is, I bought 1 full art of these for about $2.50 and 3 of the base version for about $1.50 each week of release. I checked TCG Player yesterday afternoon, which would have been May 25th, so things could have changed. But the full art was pushing $15, and the base model was $8 or $9. So people are starting to catch on that this card is an actual free spell. Lethal Scheme, great card. I totally endorse it. Not sponsored. Stinging Study, basically 5 mana, draw 5, lose 5 life. Again, we're able to replenish our hand. It is an instant, so it is instant speed interaction, so to speak, if we ever needed to use it. I like Stinging Study a lot. If you've seen my Dragon deck, you'll know that that's slotted in there. Okay, onto artifacts. Skull Clamp, I would be aggressive enough to say single best card in the deck. Your whole strategy is around making 1/1s, and this just kills them and draws a card. Essentially free card draw for the entire game. I would say if I were to purchase this deck and test it enough and then slot in my tutors, I would actually make room for Steel Shaper's Gift just to grab Skull Clamp. That's how nasty of a card it is. And it's not just in a deck like this. I mean, in any deck, Skull Clamp is very good, but there are decks that can abuse it. I have this in my Shadowborn Apostle deck, which gets pretty nutty as well. Obviously, my Goblin Tribal deck, Krenko, that's in there. And this deck is no different. And like I said, I would play Steel Shaper's Gift just to fetch this out. 2 mana ramp, Soul Ring, Signet, Fellwar Stone. I opted for the talismans as opposed to the signets because they tap for mana on their own. Phyrexian Altar, I was building the deck and I was like, why not? Put those 1/1s to use. If I have, a surplus of 1/1s, I don't have a Lord, they can't punch through. They're just kind of dirtling around sitting. Might as well just sack them, turn them into mana. Coat of Arms, in my opinion, one of, if not the best, just overall tribal reward, tribal payoff in the game. If I have 10 vampires, again, arbitrary number of 10, boom, slam this down on the board. The entire board is just going to turn into an army of just, 11, 11, 10, 10s, whatever they are, creatures. Coat of Arms, have it in my sliver deck. I like this. I think it's in my goblin deck as well. So Coat of Arms, good for this deck. Now, Vanquisher's Banner, I go back and forth with in other decks, but I figured in this deck it is a little bit more powerful. So you got to think based on Edgar Markov, right? 5 mana, play a vampire, draw a card, and then make a 1/1. So that kind of synergy, again, kind of with some of the previous cards we talk about, create a chain and an engine of cards replacing themselves and putting additional bodies on board. And it also feeds into the Lord sub-theme, right? It gives your entire board +1/+1. So that's why I opted to play Vanquisher's Banner. And then Bolas's Citadel. It's Bolas's Citadel. We're in black. It's going to be good regardless. I haven't tested this deck, but I've seen some videos online of gameplay, as well as just, stories from like friends in my play group or people online where they're like, yeah, I've been playing Edgar Markov, and I was playing a lot of 1/1 vampires and 2 mana, 1 mana, 3 mana vampires. And, I play Bolas's Citadel, and I'm like, all right, flip a 1/1, pay a life, flip a 2/2, or a 2 mana card, pay 2 life, flip a 1 mana card, pay 1 life. And you've paid maybe 10 life that turn, but you've accumulated, 4 vampires, an artifact, and 2 artifacts, and then you've made like an additional 4 1/1 tokens that are buffed by your lords. So you can see how that would get out of control. Enchantments, Mihut Massacre. It is our other board wipe. It's modular. It's flexible. We can choose what we want to kill. And then it also has the aristocrat kind of text stapled on it. So I think Mihut Massacre is just a slam dunk in here. Smothering Tithe. Not a ton to say about that. It's fantastic. It'd be silly not to include it, especially with our budget. Cathar's Crusade. This could be any other tribal payoff you want. I opted for this just because it continues to grow my army as I play additional creatures. And you can see, like, if you have Vanquisher's Banner and things like that on the battlefield, then you have a Cathar's Crusade. You're like, play a creature, give everything an additional counter, draw a card, they get +1 for the Lords, play a creature, each subsequent creature gets +1/+1 counters. And you can just see how things kind of stack up by turn 5 to 6, and your opponents just kind of don't know what to do and how to respond. This could be any tribal payoff you'd like. If we kind of go into the considering section here, the only other cards I would probably play for that is you could play Kindred Charge. That could be a little clunky. Or Shade Animosity is just a slam dunk. It costs less mana. It doesn't give you as large of a boost at times, but it does cost less. And then the land base, pretty loose skeleton here. You kind of do whatever you'd like with it, but we weren't really on a budget, so we included Ancient Tomb. Obviously all the fetches, Arid Mesa, Blood Crypt, Shockland, another fetch land. Bajuka Bog, we're in black. It's a free roll to exile a graveyard. Cavern of Souls, we're at a high power level. Things get countered. This protects us from that, and it adds 1 mana of any color. Command Tower, again, I know I talked about this before, but if you know me, I love MDFCs, and I play the Kamigawa cycle of lands in literally all my decks except for one. The only deck I don't play one of these in is my mono green bear deck, which is a budget, so I really can't include Beseiju in that. But these are a good price right now, so pick these up. So this one is just untap planes, and then you could channel it to deal 4 damage to something. Again, it's just better than a planes in almost every way. Exotic Orchard, another Shockland. We're playing the slow lands from Midnight Hunt Cycle, the check lands, the crowd lands from Battle Bond, another fetch. Playing the 1 mountain just because it is a fetch target and we can need it. Nomad Outpost, it's tapped, but it's a tri-land. Path of Ancestry, I think it's a good card all the way around. I know it does come into play tapped, but again, lines of play is, hey, cast a vampire, scry 1, draw 1, right? Or scry 1, make a 1/1, right? So then if you had Vanquisher's Banner on the board or something of that nature, then you draw that card. The obligatory Dracula's Tomb. I mean, we're in Vampires. You got to play Dracula's Tomb, aka Phyrexian Tower. Comes into play untapped, taps for a colorless, or you can sack a creature at double black, put those 1/1s to use. Playing the 1 planes because it's fetchable. Sacred Foundry, the Triome, Secluded Courtyard. So I like this card. I'm a little higher on this card than most people, but do with that information as you will. I think this card's awesome. Taps for a colorless, and when it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type. You add a mana of any color to cast a creature or activate an ability of that creature. So that kind of utility, making colorless, tapping for a colored mana for abilities and spells, very good. Shattered Sanctum, one of the slow lands. Silent Clearing. So I'm not playing all of the Boros lands because we're not as heavy in black or in red and white. So I slotted in Silent Clearing just for the fact that it is kind of the next best cycle that we were missing. So it taps, you pay life to add, a black or a white. It's essentially kind of like Mana Confluence. But then late game, when you don't need it, you sack it, draw a card. Soken'zan, another one of those Neon Dynasty lands. It's an untapped mountain, and then you can make 2 1/1s with it. Again, you're not going to use the 1/1s a ton, but in theory, if your board is big and all your 1/1s are now 5/5s and you can't skull clamp them, you can just make 2 tokens. 2 swamps because we had some space and they're fetchable. Takenuma, the other Kamigawa land, untapped swamp, and then you could channel it, mill 3, add a creature back. Urborg, the other Battle Bond land. Vault of the Archangel, I felt like deserved a slot. Taps for a colorless, and then for 4 mana and this, you can give all your creatures Death Touch and Lifelink. Kind of recoup some of the life that we lost late game. And then Voldaren Estate, I kind of looked over this a little bit, but it taps for a colorless, and then you could pay 1 life to add 1 mana of any color to cast a vampire. But then you could tap 5 and it to create a blood token. But that ability costs 1 less to cast for each vampire. So essentially you just tap it, make a blood token at a lot of the times. Not bad. I think it deserves a spot. Only 23 cents, not bad. So that is the overall deck. That is kind of what I would go with if I were to purchase this. Now, kind of in the Moxfield link below, you guys can look at some of the things I was experimenting with and the things I was looking at. I'll just talk through some of the cards that, highlighted. See, Damn. Changeling Outcast, it's a 1/1 vampire. I opted to cut Esper Sentinel just because I'd rather play a 1/1 vampire in that slot. Some vampires. This is another Lord if you need another Lord. This is another Reanimator card. Nighthawk Scavenger, I feel like is a good value card. I do believe it deserves a slot in this deck, and I think with enough testing it would make its way in, but there was just some cards I wanted to try out, so it ended up being cut. I don't like this card at all. Veto. Perforos is really cool. Sub-strategy you can do with like Perforos, Impact Tremors, and the new Devil. I forget the new Devil's name, but essentially it's Impact Tremors on a creature, so you can get out of hand with that. Twilight Prophet, people love this card. I was really high in EDH rec. I didn't see it. I feel like it's just a Phyrexian Arena on a creature. Essentially not very good. I don't think it is. Vampire Nocturnus just wasn't good enough. You got Kalatos and Anawan. Damn, I just didn't need another board wipe. Tutors, Demonic Tutor, Diabolic Tutor, Steel Shaper's Gift is in here somewhere, Enlightened Tutor, Vampiric Tutor. Those should all be in the deck, but again, we're testing things out. This is an unplayed, untested variant of Edgar Markov. So there are cards that are going to come in and come out, and I feel like over time you would slot in all those tutors, especially if you're looking for power. So if you're an experienced Edgar Markov player, unlike myself, you probably find room for those tutors by looking at the deck. Exsanguinate, not really good here. It's just cool theme artwork. Some draw spells. I don't know, it's toying around with Savine's Reclamation. Toxic Deluge, like I said, that's why we all opted to get rid of it, just because we can't. Our vampires are going to die. We don't really care about reanimating our vampires a ton, other than a choice few. 5 mana to reanimate 5 1/1s, not pretty good. That's why we didn't really include that. I think if you don't have one of the board wipes I'm playing, Austere Command is a slam dunk in here. You can keep all your 1/1s and you can kill all the big creatures, or you can keep all the big creatures, kill the small ones, kill artifacts, kill enchantments. Same goes with Farewell. And then I talked about Kindred Charge a little bit, board wipes, tutors. Delay Dispute and Village Rites were just other card draw spells. They're essentially the same thing. Despark for more removal, and then the free spells. Chroma's Will, I was super high on this when I started to build the deck, and then I was like, you know what? Edgar Markov is not going to be on the board a ton. I don't think I'm going to resolve both ends of this, but in theory, if you were somebody trying to turbo out Edgar Markov for whatever reason, this will just close out a game. Free spells, the Signets, sort of the Animus, Ash's Altar, Herald's Horn. Legion's Landing is another card people were high on. So for 1 white mana, it makes a 1/1, and then when you attack with 3 or more creatures, you transform it. Once it's transformed, it transforms into essentially a Plains, but then you could tap it in 3 mana to make a 1/1. I just don't see the appeal because if I were to include this, I would just include any other 1/1 vampire to trigger Edgar Markov. So again, it's just a personal preference. Impact Tremor, Shade Animosity, like I said, Anointed Procession to double up on stuff. Obviously, Exquisite Blood, Sanguine Mon for theme. Couple coffers, Strip Mine. I would probably throw Strip Mine in there, maybe even over the utility land I was playing Unclaimed Territory. So that is the deck. Let me know what you guys think of this. Give me your opinions. Like, is this a decent take for an untested Edgar Markov player who's not very experienced? Am I playing some really bad cards? Am I playing some really cool cards? Am I playing some cards that you haven't thought about playing? Engage, interact. Let me know what you guys think. For the 4 or 5 people who requested this deck, I hope you enjoy it. I did spend probably a total of 5 hours just on Moxfield, shuffling cards around, plus research and deck profiles and, you know, watching videos. So I did put some time into it. It's not like I threw this together on a whim. Again, thank you guys for your support. As far as in-person deck profiles, you know, I'll probably roll with my Sliver deck in the upcoming future. But these are some of the things that I have uploaded on Moxfield now that I plan on putting out. Obviously, my Sliver deck, I plan on putting that, making that public. I have a really cool Shadowborn Apostle deck, as well as like one of my Goblin Tribal decks I'm going to throw on here shortly. So be on the lookout for some of that stuff. And last thing is, be sure to support me with the TCG Player affiliate link. It actually doesn't cost you any extra money. It just takes a portion of what you spent, kicks it back to me, and then it's all going to go right back in the channel to give you guys a better experience. Obviously, you know, I already got the lighting, editing software, you know, things like that. And then, you know, there's more in the future, right? What I want to do is, you know, I love to build decks. I love to have decks, but at some point, you know, I want to showcase decks from my friends in my play group. Again, I have a really, really strong high power play group. I have a more casual laid back play group, and I'd love to just sit down with them on, you know, one of our Thursday night Magic games and profile one of their decks to show you guys. So some of the things they have is like a high power Brea, a high power Sir Gwen deck. I mean, you name it, we probably have it somewhere. So if you want to see different decks, if you like the virtual Moxfield, I could brew stuff at home. But if you want to see these decks in person, let me know. I could always snag somebody from my play group. So again, thank you guys for stopping by. I appreciate your support. Have a good day.